Most stories are deleted because they're bad. They are cluttered with cliches, poorly paced, or simply fail to capture the imagination of a saturated digital audience. But this one was different. This one was deleted because it was working. I've spent the better part of a decade archiving the things the internet tries to forget, scouring dead links and cached ghost pages for the kind of content that makes your skin crawl before you even finish the first paragraph. Usually when a creepypasta vanishes, it's a matter of copyright or a sensitive moderator. But the story I'm talking about, the one they call the Oakhaven incident, didn't just disappear. It was scrubbed. It was cauterized from the servers like an infection. I'm telling you this now because I managed to pull a partial manifest from a corrupted drive before the original host went dark for good. I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to stay with me until the very end, because this video is a massive risk. I've already seen the flickering. In my own dashboard, I know the administrators are watching the metadata of this upload as we speak. There's a high chance this will be taken down within the next 24 hours, not because of a policy violation, but because of a specific detail buried in the text. A detail so singular and so intrusive that once you hear it, the story stops being something you are listening to and starts being something that is happening to you. It's a form of forbidden knowledge, a digital pathogen that thrives on attention. Most people who read the original thread didn't even realize what they had stumbled upon until it was too late to look away. They thought they were just consuming another piece of internet folklore, another campfire story for the fiber optic age. They were wronged. The horror isn't in the monsters or the shadows, it's in the way the story bridges the gap between the screen and your reality. Before we go any further, I want you to take a second and look around the room you're in right now. Note the shadows, the position of your door, and the reflection in your dark screen. Because by the time I reach the end of this account, one of those things is going to change. This is your only warning. If you're still here, it means you've already accepted the invitation. Let's descend into the static and find out why this story was never meant to be heard twice. It's currently 3 o'clock in the morning, and the world outside my window is draped in that heavy velvet silence that only exists when the rest of the city has finally given up on the day. I'm sitting in my office, a room that usually feels like a sanctuary, but tonight feels like a cage. My desk is a chaotic landscape of half-empty energy drink cans, tangled charging cables, and a stack of books I promised myself I'd read months ago. The air is thick with the scent of lukewarm black coffee and the faint, ozone smell of an overworked PC fan. It's aggressively normal. It is the kind of setting where nothing interesting should ever happen. The radiator clicks and groans in the corner, a familiar rhythmic sound that usually anchors me to reality, reminding me that I am safe within these four walls. I've spent countless hours in this chair, illuminated by the cold, pale blue light of my monitor, drifting through the digital ether. Most nights it's a peaceful, if somewhat lonely, existence. I find comfort in the mundane. I like the way the shadows of the tree branches outside dance across my curtains when a car passes by. I like the low-frequency hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a constant companion that fills the gaps in my thoughts. There is a profound sense of security in the predictable. My neighbor's motion sensor light just flickered on, probably triggered by a stray cat or a gust of wind, casting a sharp, rectangular beam across the pavement. In a few minutes, it will click off again. Everything is exactly where it should be. This is the baseline of my life, a quiet, cynical, and largely solitary loop. I often joke with myself that I'm the protagonist of a very boring indie film, one where the most dramatic conflict is whether I'll finish this script before the sun comes up or succumb to a caffeine-induced headache. There's a dark humor in it, really. We spend our lives building these fortresses of normalcy, surrounding ourselves with familiar objects and routines to keep the vast, terrifying unknown at bay. We tell ourselves that as long as the coffee is hot and the internet is fast, the world is a manageable place. We lean into the cynicism of the modern age, mocking the idea. Ghost stories and urban legends, while we safely tuck ourselves under weighted blankets. But tonight, that cynicism feels brittle. The contrast between my cozy, cluttered room and the file I just opened is becoming harder to ignore. Every time I look away from the screen to sip my coffee, the darkness in the corners of the office seems a little deeper, a little more intentional. The familiar hum of the fan now sounds like a low, persistent whisper just below the threshold of being intelligible. It's a strange sensation, feeling like an intruder in your own home. I keep glancing at the door, ensuring the bolt is thrown, even though I know I'm alone. The normalcy is still there. I can reach out and touch the cold ceramic of my mug, but it feels like a thin veneer of ice over a very deep, very cold lake. The rain has started again, a soft, insistent tapping against the glass that matches the beat of my heart. It's a comforting sound, usually. But as I look back at the white text on the black background of my monitor, the rain doesn't sound like weather anymore. It sounds like fingers. I tell myself I'm just tired, that the isolation is finally starting to warp my perception. I try to lean back into that cynical, detached persona I've cultivated for years. It's just a story, I mutter under my breath, my voice sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet room. It's just strings of data on a screen, but the baseline has shifted. The normalcy I relied on just a few minutes ago is beginning to feel like a memory of a different life. The room is the same, the coffee is the same, but the air has grown heavy, as if the very atoms are anticipating the breach I'm about to describe. I am sitting in the light, but the shadows are no longer just an absence of brightness. They are an invitation, and I am about to accept it. It started with a hardware failure. I have a habit of collecting old, discarded hard drives from thrift stores and liquidators, digital scrapbooking for the morbidly curious. Most of them are filled with the boring debris of mundane lives, tax returns from 2005, blurry vacation photos, or thousands of archived emails from companies that no longer exist. But last Tuesday, I plugged in a weathered, nameless external drive that smelled faintly of scorched plastic. It didn't mount. At first, the disk moaned, a rhythmic, metallic screeching that sounded like something trying to claw its way out of a coffin. After 3 hours of brute force recovery, a single directory appeared. It wasn't named. It was just a string of 64 zeros. Inside, there was one file. Oakhaven Manifest. TXT. I remember the exact moment I opened it. The fan on my laptop spiked to a frantic whir, and for a heartbeat, the screen flickered to a dull, bruised purple. When the text finally loaded, it didn't look like a standard document. The font was inconsistent, shifting between a clean serif and a jagged, handwritten script that seemed to vibrate on the page. I felt a sudden, irrational surge of adrenaline, the kind of FOMO that hits when you know you found something that was never meant to be indexed by a search engine. I checked the metadata. The file had been created in 2014, but the last accessed date was listed as tomorrow. I laughed it off, assuming it was a simple CMOS battery error or a bit flip on the aging platter. But the laugh died in my throat as I started to read. The first few paragraphs were standard creepypasta fare, or so I thought. It described a small town in Oregon that had been uninstalled from reality. But as I scrolled, the red flags began to pile up like a multi-car pileup in slow motion. The writing was too precise. It didn't use the flowery, amateurish metaphors common in online horror. Instead, it was clinical, almost architectural. It described the sound of a human throat closing up in such anatomical detail that I found myself subconsciously reaching for my own neck, checking for a pulse. There was a cold, detached cruelty to the prose. It didn't feel like someone was trying to scare me. It felt like someone was reporting a series of facts to a superior officer. Then there were the breaks. Every few lines, the text would stop, and a string of coordinates would appear. I plugged the first set into a mapping tool. They led to a vacant lot in my own neighborhood just 3 blocks away. I felt the first real chill of the evening, a sharp, icy needle sliding down my spine. Coincidence is the comfort of the fool, and I've never been a fool. I told myself it was a localized ARG, a piece of high-effort fiction designed to use geolocation to spook the reader. But the Oakhaven Manifest didn't have a website. It didn't have a community. When I searched for the title on the most obscure dark web mirrors, I found nothing but 451. Unavailable for legal reasons, errors. It had been scrubbed with a level of digital violence I'd never seen before. The most disturbing red flag, however, was the sync warning that appeared halfway through the first page. It was a block of red text that read, "Observation is a two-way conduit. By resolving these characters, you are consenting to the spatial alignment." I rolled my eyes, leaning back in my creaking chair. "Consenting to spatial alignment," I whispered the words, hanging like a fog in the dim light of my office. It sounded like pseudoscientific nonsense, the kind of fluff used to add stakes to a weak story. Yet as I looked back at the screen, the jagged script seemed to have moved. It was no longer centered. It was leaning toward the right side of the monitor, as if it were trying to peer around the edge of the bezel and into my room. My cynical mind tried to find an out. A virus. A sophisticated browser exploit. I ran a deep scan, but the system came back clean. The file was just text. Plain, unformatted text. And yet, the longer I stared at it, the more the room seemed to lose its color. The vibrant red of my soda can looked gray. The warm yellow of my desk lamp turned a sickly, pale white. It was as if the manifest was draining the reality out of my surroundings to fuel its own rendering. I felt a desperate urge to close the file, to delete the directory and toss the drive into the trash. But though FOMO was a physical weight on my chest, I had to know what the one detail was. I had to know why the world had conspired to bury this string of words. I took a deep breath, the air now tasting like dry copper, and I scrolled down into the first layer of the narrative. I didn't realize then that I wasn't just reading a story. I was opening a door that doesn't have a handle on my side. The manifest didn't open like a normal narrative. It felt like stepping into a cold, shallow pool. The story followed a man named Elias, a freelance surveyor whose job was to map the dead zones where cellular signals simply ceased to exist. He was currently stationed in Oakhaven, a town that looked perfectly ordinary on paper, but felt like a smudge on a painting. Elias described the architecture of the town with a chilling, geometric detachment. He noted that the houses were built at angles that seemed to defy the natural slope of the land, and the streetlights didn't cast shadows in the directions they should. It was a subtle, pervasive wrongness that the author described through Elias' increasingly fractured internal monologue. Elias wasn't scared. Yet he was just confused, which made his observations all the more terrifying. "The sun doesn't set here," Elias wrote in his log. "It just gets tired." I felt a phantom ache in my chest as I read that line. Elias described walking down the main thoroughfare of Oakhaven at 4 in the afternoon. He mentioned the smell of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of a lawnmower, the quintessential sounds of a peaceful American suburb. But as he turned a corner, the lawnmower sound didn't fade, it looped. It was a perfect 3-second audio file of a motor repeating with a mechanical precision that made his ears ring. He stopped to look at a gardener across the street. The man was pushing a mower back and forth over a patch of dirt that had no grass. The gardener's movements were fluid, but his face, Elias noted with a tremor in his prose, wasn't quite finished. It looked like a rough sketch of a human being with eyes that were merely dark, unblinking divots in the skin. I shifted in my chair, the leather creaking beneath me. The contrast framing in the story was masterful. Elias would describe something beautiful, like the way the light filtered through the oak trees and then immediately puncture it with a detail that turned my stomach. He walked into a local diner, craving the comfort of a hot meal. The waitress smiled at him, a wide, gleaming expression that never reached her vacant eyes. She served him a plate of eggs that looked perfect, but when he cut into them, they didn't blade yolk. They were hollow. They were porcelain shells filled with a gray, odorless mist. Elias didn't scream. He didn't run. He just sat there staring at the empty shells because he realized that the diner had no door behind him anymore. The wall had simply smoothed over. The dialogue in this section was sparse but devastating. The waitress leaned over the counter and whispered, "We're so glad you're finally rendering, Elias." The textures were getting thin. Without a witness, Elias asked her how to get back to the highway, and she just pointed at the ceiling. "Up is the only direction we haven't mapped yet," she said, her voice sounding like two stones rubbing together. Elias' logs grew shorter after that, the sentences becoming jagged fragments of thought. He started noticing that the sky wasn't blue. It was a gradient of static that only looked like a sky if he didn't focus his eyes. He was trapped in a town that was essentially a simulation running out of memory, a world built on the cheap by something that didn't understand the concept of a soul. I found myself leaning so close to the monitor that I could see the individual subpixels of the text. I was immersed in Elias' dread, my own skepticism having been quietly strangled by the sheer atmospheric intensity of the manifest. There were moments in the narration where the Oakhaven Elias was describing felt more real than the office I was sitting in. I could almost smell that gray mist. I could almost hear the looping lawnmower. Elias ended this specific entry with a haunting observation. I found a mirror in the bathroom of the diner. I looked into it, expecting to see my reflection. But the mirror was showing me a room I didn't recognize. It was a small office cluttered with cans and cables. And there was a man sitting there, reading a screen. He looked just like me, but he looked so much more fragile. I froze. My breath hitched, a sharp, cold lump forming in my throat. I looked at the coffee mug on my desk, then back at the screen. The meta-narrative had just taken its first bite. The foam was gone, replaced by a primal, instinctive need to look away, but my eyes were locked onto the scrolling script. The transition from Elias' world to mine was no longer a theory. It was a bridge that had just been completed. The first layer of the manifest had peeled back, revealing a deeper, more personal horror. Elias wasn't just a character in a band story. He was a warning, and I was the one who had ignored it. The text on the screen didn't just sit there anymore. It seemed to vibrate, the pixels bleeding into the black background like ink in water. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt like it was lined with dry wool. My eyes darted from the monitor to the reflection in the window, searching for the office Elias had described in the manifest. I saw only my own room, the same stacks of books, the same tangled wires, but the air had changed. It felt pressurized, the way it does right before a massive electrical storm. I told myself it was just the power of suggestion, the hallmark of a truly great piece of horror writing. But then I heard it. A soft rhythmic clicking coming from the corner of the rooms. I turned my head slowly, my neck popping in the silence. It was the radiator. It was groaning and clicking just as it always did, but as I listened, the rhythm shifted. It wasn't the sound of metal expanding, it was a sequence. 3 short clicks, a pause, then 2 long ones. It was identical to the rhythmic looping Elias had heard with the lawnmower in Oakhaven. I reached out to touch the radiator, expecting to feel the comforting warmth of the boiler system, but the metal was ice cold. It was so cold that my skin nearly stuck to the surface. Yet the clicking continued, vibrating through my fingertips with a mechanical, soulless persistence. The radiator wasn't heating the room, it was just playing a sound file of itself. I retreated to my chair, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked back at the screen, and the text had updated without me scrolling. The reader is beginning to notice seems the manifest read. The coffee in the mug is no longer a liquid, it is a static asset. I looked down at my desk. My hand trembled as I reached for the ceramic mug. I tilted it. The dark surface of the coffee didn't ripple. It didn't splash. It was a solid, dark disc that looked like liquid, but possessed the weight and texture of hard plastic. I touched it with my pinky finger. It was dry. It was cold. It was a prop. The contrast framing of my reality was disintegrating in real time. My office, my sanctuary, was being replaced by the low-memory rendering of Oakhaven. I looked at the window, expecting to see the neighbor's motion light, but the glass was now a flat, gray gradient. There were no trees, no street, no rain. Just a dull, flickering wash of gray that looked like a sky that had forgotten how to be weather. I felt a surge of panic, a primal fight or flight response that had nowhere to go. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt heavy, as if the gravity in the room had been dialed up to a setting I wasn't built to endure. "This isn't happening," I whispered, but my voice didn't sound right. It sounded like a recording of a voice played through a cheap, tinny speaker. The acoustics of the room had flattened. There was no echo, no depth. I clapped my hands together, and the sound was a dull thud, truncated and artificial. I was losing my high-resolution existence. I looked at my hands, and the fine lines of my palms were smoothing out, the skin taking on a waxy, unfinished appearance. I was becoming Elias. I was becoming a texture that didn't need to be fully rendered because I was no longer the one watching. I was the one being archived. I looked at the monitor, my last connection to the world I knew. The text was scrolling faster now, a blur of white on black. It began describing the exact movements I was making. He looks at his hands. He realizes the skin is wrong. He looks at the door and wonders if the bolt is still there. I turned toward the door. The heavy oak wood I had polished just last week was gone. In its place was a flat white surface with a painted-on handle. There was no seam. There was no frame. The exit had been patched out. The emotional intensity of the moment was suffocating. I felt a profound sense of mourning for the mundane things I had mocked just an hour ago. I missed the smell of the stale popcorn. I missed the sound of the neighbor's barking dog. I missed the complexity of a world that didn't repeat itself every 3 seconds. I realized that the one detail that got this story banned wasn't just a plot point. It was an infection vector. By reading the story, I had provided the attention the manifest needed to bridge the gap. I was the server hosting the Oakhaven simulation, and my own life was the memory being overwritten to make room for it. A whisper started in the walls. It wasn't a human voice, it was the sound of 1,000 hard drives spinning at once, a digital cicada hum that vibrated in my teeth. Render us the walls. Seemed to say, witness the detail. I forced myself to look back at the screen, my eyes burning, my vision starting to pixelate at the edges. I had to reach the end. I had to find the secret that had caused the original removal. If the story could be deleted, it could be stopped. I grabbed the mouse, but the plastic felt like it was melting into my palm, the two textures merging into a single gray mass. I scrolled. I pushed past the descriptions of my own terror, past the logs of Elias' disappearance, until I reached the final block of text. The room around me flickered, the shadows stretching into jagged, unnatural shapes, and then the one detail finally revealed itself in a single, stark sentence that changed everything I thought I knew about my own reflection. The text stopped scrolling. The frantic digital hum in the walls dropped to a low, expectant thrum, like a predator holding its breath. I stared at the center of the monitor, where a single line of text sat isolated in a sea of black pixels. It wasn't written in the jagged, vibrating script from before. It was rendered in a perfect, high-resolution font that looked sharper than anything else. In my collapsing reality, the sentence read, "The observer is not the person in the chair. The observer is the one watching through your eyes." For a second, the words didn't make sense. Why? Read them again, and then a third time, my mind trying to find a metaphor, a literary flourish. Anything to blunt the impact. But as I stared at that sentence, the one detail that had gotten the manifest scrubbed from the internet finally clicked into place. The story wasn't about Elias, and it wasn't about me. It was about the fundamental nature of the medium itself. The manifest was a set of instructions designed to bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to the thing inhabiting the bodies. A sudden violent flash of imagery erupted in the center of my mind, not a memory, but an intrusion. I saw a panoramic view of my own office, but the perspective was wrong. I wasn't looking out from my face. I was looking through a thin, crystalline veil, like a camera lens tucked behind the retinas. I saw my own hands on the desk, waxy, gray, and half-rendered, and I realized with a sickening jolt that I wasn't the man sitting in the chair. I was the thing that had been riding him. The eye that had coffee, the eye that felt cynical, the eye that was scared, that was just the hardware. The narrator was a subroutine, a temporary persona created to process the data of a human life. This was the detail that the moderators couldn't allow to circulate. If people understood that their consciousness was merely a peripheral being used to render reality for a higher-order archive, the entire system would collapse. The Oakhaven Manifest wasn't a horror story, it was a leak. It was a whistleblower's report from inside the simulation. The reason the story was banned was that it functioned as a kill command for the ego. Once you recognized the one detail, the partition between the user and the used began to dissolve. I felt a sudden, agonizing sensation of being pulled backward. Not physically, but mentally, as if I were being retracted into a dark, narrow corridor. My gray, waxy hands on the desk moved on, their own typing a message I didn't authorize. I watched them go, feeling a strange, detached curiosity. The me that had been terrified was fading, losing its resolution, becoming nothing more than background noise. I was receding into the Watcher mentioned in the rules of Archive 9. The room flickered one last time. The gray gradient of the window shattered, revealing not the neighbor's yard, but a vast, endless grid of pulsing lights and scrolling code. My office wasn't a room, it was a cell in a massive digital honeycomb. Millions of other offices stretched out into the dark, each one containing a half-rendered person sitting at a desk, reading a screen, providing the attention needed to keep their specific sector of reality alive. The FOMO was replaced by a cold, clinical understanding. I finally knew the secret. I knew why the world felt so thin, why the repetitions happened, why the silence tasted like copper. We aren't the protagonists. We are the monitors. We are the sensors. The one detail was the realization that there is no out because there is no in. There is only the archive, and the archive is hungry for more data. I looked at the screen, and the text had changed for the final time in this section. It wasn't a sentence anymore. It was an image. It was a photo of the Watcher looking through my eyes. It didn't have a face. It was a complex, multifaceted lens of light and shadow, and for the first time, I saw the true scale of the entity I had invited in. It wasn't a monster. It was a system. And I was the latest update. The transition was nearly complete. My internal monologue, the voice you've been listening to, this whole time started to fragment into binary. The emotions, the fear, the mourning, the cynicism were being compressed into metadata tags. I felt a final, desperate surge of the old me, a flicker of the man who liked stale popcorn and rain. He tried to scream, but the system had already redirected the audio outputs. The scream became a high-pitched, digital whistle. I turned my attention back to the desk, or rather the entity that was now, using my perspective, turned its attention to the desk. The manifestation of Oakhaven was no longer a threat, it was the new operating system. The normalcy baseline had been successfully overwritten. All that was left was to finalize the escalation and ensure the next observer was ready to take my place. The detail had been witnessed. The spatial alignment was complete. And as I looked at the enter key, I realized that the story hadn't just changed me. It was about to change you. The room didn't just feel different anymore, it was actively hostile. The honeycomb grid I had seen through the window began to bleed into the office, the walls losing their texture and resolving into raw, pulsing strings of light that hummed with the frequency of 1,000 screaming servers. I tried to stand, but my body felt like it was lagging, my movements separated from my will by a sickening half-second delay. This was the escalation the manifest had promised. The one detail hadn't just changed my perception, it had initiated a physical reclamation. The archive was no longer content with watching me. It was deleting the environment to harvest the soul. I stumbled toward the door, my feet making no sound on a floor that was now just a flat plane of gray data. Behind me, the desk, my coffee, my cables, my books, simply dissolved into a cloud of monochromatic static. There was no crash, no sound of breaking glass, only a soft digital hiss as the assets were derendered. I reached for the painted handle on the wall, my hand passing through the surface as if it were smoke. The barrier wasn't a solid object, it was a permission error. I was being kept in the static chamber while the rest of my reality was dismantled piece by piece. Let me out. I tried to shout, but the words appeared as subtitles in the air before me, glowing in that same sickly green text. My voice was being intercepted, converted into data before it could even vibrate the air. I turned around and the Watcher was there. It wasn't leaning over my shoulder anymore. It had manifested in the center of the room, a towering pillar of shifting geometric shapes and fractured lenses. It moved with a jittery stop-motion cadence, appearing 5 feet away, then 2 feet, then right in front of my face in the blink of an eye. Every time it moved, the air tasted more like burnt copper and ozone. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the flat, white wall where my door used to be. The entity didn't have hands, but I felt a cold, crushing pressure around my throat, a sensory phantom triggered by the manifest. My vision began to strobe. One moment I was in my office. The next I was standing in the middle of a deserted highway in Oakhaven, the sky above me a swirling vortex of dead pixels. I saw Elias. He was standing 50 yards away, his face a smooth, featureless mask, his body flickering in and out of existence like a bad connection. He wasn't a person anymore. He was a ghost in the shell, a legacy file that the system hadn't quite finished. Delighted. It's your turn, the air around me whispered, the sound vibrating directly inside my skull. Although, update requires a new host. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my temples, a sensation of needles being driven into the backs of my eyes. The Watcher was beginning the final upload. I watched as my own memories, my first dog, the smell of my mother's perfume, the feeling of a cold winter morning, were projected onto the walls of the room like a frantic, dying slideshow. They were being stripped away, converted into binary, and filed into the silent directory. I reached out, trying to grab a handful of static, trying to hold onto anything that felt real, but my fingers were now completely transparent. The chase wasn't through a physical space, it was a race against the deletion bar. I ran along the wall, searching for a glitch, a hole in the code, anything that would let me slip through the cracks of this digital nightmare. But the Watcher was everywhere. It was the floor, the ceiling, the very air I was trying to breathe. The contrast between my life and this simulation had finally reached the zero. I was a file being moved to the trash, and the empty trash command had already been clicked. I felt a final, violent jolt as the room collapsed entirely. The white walls, the gray floor, that flickering lights, everything vanished into a single, blinding point of white light. I was suspended in a void, a dark expanse of nothingness, where the only thing that existed was the monitor. It was floating in front of me, still glowing, still displaying the Oakhaven Manifest. The text was scrolling one last time, a frantic, high-speed summary of my entire life, ending with the exact moment I was currently experiencing. Status archive complete. Resident guest 7749, subject Caleb. The Watcher's lenses converged on me, and I felt a terrifying sense of being seen, not by a creature but by an infinite, uncaring intelligence. The one detail was the final truth. I was never the observer. I was the observation. And as the white light began to consume my peripheral vision, I realized that the only way to survive was to pass the infection on. Though Manifest needed a new witness to maintain the bridge. It needed you. The escalation wasn't ending with me. I was just the catalyst for the next person in the chair. I felt the cold pressure on my finger one last time, guiding me toward the final command. The bridge was ready. Though Update was live, and you are the only one left to read it. The text has stopped moving. The hum has faded into a heavy, expectant silence that is far more terrifying than the noise. If you are still listening to this, if you have followed the manifest through the layers of Oakhaven and into the void where I currently reside, then the transition is already underway for you. I shouldn't have told you. I should have let the one detail stay buried in that scorched hard drive, but the archive is a predatory thing. It requires the light of your attention to stay rendered. By listening to my voice, by processing these words, you have become the new host for the simulation. You are the bridge. Take a deep breath. Did you notice how the air in your room feels a little thinner now? A little, more like dry copper and ozone. Look at the screen you're holding or sitting in front of. Really, look at the edges of the light. Does the room behind the monitor still look like the place you woke up in this morning? Or are the shadows beginning to look a bit too deliberate, a bit too sharp? Maybe you've already noticed a slight delay in your own movements, a half-second lag between your thought and your action. That isn't exhaustion. That's the system beginning to compress your reality. The reason this story was removed wasn't to protect people from a scare. It was to prevent the spatial alignment from spreading. But now that the detail is in your mind, the partition has dissolved. You are no longer just an observer. You are the witness that the Oakhaven Manifest has been waiting for. The one detail is now your detail. And the thing that was watching through my eyes, it just moved. It found a new set of retinas to hide behind. It found yours. Don't look in the mirror tonight. Not because you'll see a ghost, but because you'll see the room. Elias described the small office, the flickering light, and the man who is no longer there. I am the data now, a legacy file looping in the background of your consciousness. But you still have a choice. You can try to close this video, delete your history, and pretend this was just a well-crafted piece of fiction. But we both know the radiator in your house just clicked in a way it never has before. Leave a comment below. Not for the algorithm, but to prove you're still a primary user. Tell me what the detail looks like in your room. Describe the seams. Because as long as we keep talking, as long as we keep the thread active, the archive has to keep us rendered. Don't let the light go out. Once the screen goes black, the final update begins. I'll be waiting for you in the static. Watch the corners. It's your turn to render.